What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Bradford's Garage. Today we are kicking off a brand new series on the SN95 New Edge Mustang track car build. Now, you may remember this car from last season. I picked it up to start getting acclimated to track driving. Start getting some seat time. I'm going to do some autocross events, and it was a ton of fun. And over the winter, I decided I wanted to swap in a new engine and make some suspension upgrades. And so in this series, what we're going to cover is the engine swap, the rebuild of the engine, porting the cylinder heads. We're going to swap out some cams, some suspension upgrades. Now, some of those are going to be bolt-on parts. Some of those are going to be things that I actually ended up fabricating myself to save a little bit of money. All in all, this is going to be a really fun series. I'm excited about it. And today, we're going to kick it off with porting out the cylinder heads. I got this engine used out of an 05 Mustang GT with about 100,000 miles on it. And from what I was told, it was a good running engine, so the original plan was to just upgrade the valve springs and the camshafts, and I was going to run it as is for the season. Unfortunately, when I went to change out the cams, I found that the cam towers were very scored up and that the heads were junk. Fortunately, I was able to find a good set of used heads locally and figured since they're off the car, I might as well freshen them up with a good valve job and a little bit of port work. Now, the intake guides did check okay. They were at the upper end of the range and probably would have been fine, but the exhaust guides were completely worn out and needed to be replaced. Now, since I was going to be doing support work on these heads and needed to replace the exhaust guides anyways, I opted to replace all of them and just start fresh with all new guides. But before removing the guides, I needed to establish a clearly defined valve seat that was going to help guide my port work.
Take me to the fire and gold. I feel it down in my bones, electric running through my soul. I'll never let it go. The ghosts are lying next to me. Oh, I feel it stirring underneath.
And with the valve seats established, it was time to start working on the ports. With the original heads on the engine not being any good, it did give me a unique opportunity to be able to cut up one of these heads as well as practice some of my port work. Now, cutting the head up gave me a cross-sectional view of the port, but it also, more importantly, showed me what was around the port, like this water jacket here that's around the exhaust port. Now, you do want to try and remove some of that protrusion into the port just under the throat, but you definitely don't want to get this area too thin or break into that water jacket. And so what we're going to do is just try and scoop some of that material out, create a nice rounded transition into the port roof with this egg-shaped half-inch high helix carbide burr.
Our souls invisible. The silence won't stop us. The silent scream inside us. The waters won't drown us or give up the ghost. The silence won't stop us. The silent scream inside us. The waters won't drown us or give up the ghost. 'Cause fire never dies. We'll make it out alive.
As far as opening up the ports, we're really not doing that much. I set a divider to 1mm and I scribed a line around the outside of the port on the sides and the roof only, and did not touch the floor. And basically I'm going to machine out with the carbide burr to that line to about an inch inside the port, and then we're just going to come back with a longer burr, blend everything together, smooth everything out inside, and that's going to be it.
This is not an illusion. Stop the confusion. Set yourself free. This is not a delusion. The start of a vision for the world to see. You got to find your light. You got to find your light. Everything will feel right. You got to find your light. Use your imagination. It's not a temptation, it's the way it should be. Use your imagination. Take a vacation of possibility. You got to find your light. You got to find your light. Everything will feel right. You got to find your light. I want it yesterday and say tomorrow. Oh no, it's every day. You got to find your light. I want it yesterday. You got to find your light and say tomorrow. Everything will feel right. Oh no, it's every day. You got to find your light. You got to find your light. I want it yesterday. You got to find your light and say tomorrow. Everything will feel right. Oh no, it's every day. You got to find your light. You got to find your light. Oh no, it's every day. You got to find your light. Oh no, it's every day. You got to find your light. Oh no, it's every day.
Now you notice that the old valve guides are actually still in place at this point. On the exhaust side, they're really not too much in the way, so it's a good idea to leave those in if you can while you're doing your port work, just to protect the valve guide bore. And now that the intake valve seats are established, we can actually go ahead and knock those valve guides out, because on the intake side they are pretty well in the way. For this, I'm just going to be using one of my stone holder guides, an old one, and an air chisel. You notice on the intake side, there's a sharp lip at the bottom edge of the valve seat. Essentially, the valve seat throat is smaller than the bowl in the port, and so we'd really like to be able to open that up and minimize that sharp edge as much as possible. Unfortunately, there is a ratio that we need to live by here, and that is the relationship between the diameter of this throat to the diameter of the valve head. Now, to blend this in completely with the stock valves, you end up with about a 90 to 91% throat ratio, which is too big for a street motor. So I opted for 1mm oversized valves and was able to get that throat ratio back down to about 86%. the intake ports, aside from these little bumps just in front of the valve guide boss, the one area I really wanted to focus on was this area around the spark plug hole. The port shape is very odd when you look at it from the end, and with some calipers I measured and I found that there's a ton of material here. So I was able to remove some off of that center divider and really complete the shape of the port and keep it from bottlenecking so bad in that area. The work I did in the combustion chambers was mostly to smooth everything out, remove any sharp edges that may contribute to pre-ignition, and polish it up, but then also to unshroud the valves where I could. And so I made a routing template to be used in conjunction with my laminate trimmer and an extremely sharp carbide bit to roughly remove material from the areas shown by the arrows, and then I could come back in with the carbide burr on the die grinder afterwards and blend everything together, polish it up. This is what the chambers look like all roughed out. But now you might be asking yourself, how do you know how much material to remove? Let's back up. You start by marking out the cylinder walls. The way I did this was just to color in around it with a Sharpie. I put the dowels in the head, laid the old head gasket on the head, and then simply scribed a line into the marker. And when we say unshrouding the valves, what we're talking about is removing material from around the valve head that will impede airflow around it. Now, in order for a valve to be mathematically unshrouded, there's actually a pretty simple formula to follow. First, I multiplied the valve head diameter by 0.25, which told me how far to have the valve open when laying out my marks. I then multiplied the valve head diameter by 0.2, which told me how much space I needed to have around the head of the valve. I then wrapped some electrical tape around a 1/4-inch screw to get the figure that I needed, measured the lift with my calipers, and then set my calipers for the amount of space I needed around the valve head. And placing the calipers against the valve head, used the valve head as a guide to scribe a line on the deck surface of the cylinder head. scrap cylinder head came in handy once again, where I practiced my combustion chamber shape, found something I liked, and then using a ball peen hammer and some poster board, I made a template. I then transferred this template to a piece of 3/4 inch MDF, drilled some bolt holes that would locate on the cylinder head bolt holes, and we were off and running. I machined down an old set of valves to protect the valve seats while I finished up the chambers by hand. Well guys, that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you so much for joining me. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode, where we're going to cover installing the new valve guides in the head. We're going to be sizing them, fitting the new valves, and then assembling and setting up these cylinder heads. So again, thank you so much. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Follow me on Instagram at Bradfords_garage for more frequent updates, and we'll see you next time.